Okay, so this lesson is about applying situation ethics and would be an AO1 30-mark essay in the exam. So here is an example of the type of question that they could ask. Explain situation ethics and apply it to an ethical issue of your choice, apart from abortion and euthanasia. Obviously they could ask you that in slightly different ways, but I think for the majority of the questions they could ask you, the way that we're going to set out the essay in this lesson would probably be okay. So just a bit of an overview of situation ethics before we get into planning the essay. It's obviously a teleological theory which says that the rightness or wrongness of an action is determined by whether or not it results in love. It was developed by Joseph Fletcher, who was a Christian, and he based the theory on Jesus' teachings about the importance of love in the decision making of a Christian. It is known as the middle way between legalism and antinomianism. Legalism being you follow laws blindly, antinomianism being that there is no laws and you do what you want. And it's known as the middle way between those things because Fletcher says that you follow the laws of your religion or the laws of the land, hence legalism, but you are able to break those laws, hence antinomianism, if breaking them results in love. So therefore it does follow laws, but those laws can be broken, and therefore it is in the middle of legalism and antinomianism. Fletcher develops the 6 fundamental principles to tell us what he means by love, and the 4 working principles, which are a guide for us for how to make decisions. So coming on to the plan for this essay then, so obviously we'll have an introduction. Then with any applying essay, the second paragraph really should be a reasonably detailed explanation of the ethical issue that you're discussing. The more detail you put into that paragraph, the easier it will be then to get into the finer details of applying. Because Fletcher develops the 4 working principles to tell us how to make our ethical decisions, that's really what an application essay should be based on, unless of course the question asks you specifically to apply the 6 fundamental principles, for example. So we would apply pragmatism, relativism, positivism. Then after we've applied positivism, we'll bring in a little bit of the fundamental principles, in particular discussing the kind of love which Fletcher says that we should act out of, agape love. Then application of personalism to the issue, and then a conclusion. So when you're doing an application essay, whether it be for situation ethics or utilitarianism, I think this really is the easiest kind of structure for each paragraph. So you should start off in each paragraph by explaining a part of the theory, whatever part of the theory it is that you're going to be discussing in that paragraph. Explain it, detail it, give the examiner an indication that you have good knowledge of that part of the theory. Then you apply the ethical issue that you've discussed in paragraph 2 after the introduction. You apply that part of the theory that you're going to be discussing in the paragraph. You apply it to the ethical issue that you've decided to talk about in the essay, and then the final bit of the paragraph should conclude whether or not the application of that part of the theory to the ethical issue of your choice shows that what is the moral thing to do. So starting off with the introduction, as we've discussed, it's teleological. Fletcher came up with it based on Jesus' teachings on love, and then you would just briefly say how he talks about the 6 fundamental principles to tell us what love is, and the 4 working principles which give us a guide of how to act in an ethical situation. Then we'll talk about the ethical issue. Now for this lesson I'm talking about, should a woman steal from a shop to feed her starving family? And as I said before, the more detail you make this paragraph, obviously you don't want to go on for ages and ages, but 4 lines or so, just explaining the ethical issue. The more detail you put in, the easier it is to really apply the theory. So I've said here that there's one shopkeeper who has no employees and no family. That's obviously going to be important because when we're discussing whether or not it creates the most love, obviously the more people that are affected would have an influence on whether or not most love has been created by an action. The woman has 3 children. So the first paragraph then of application is application to working principle number 1, which is pragmatism. So you explain pragmatism, and that is that the situationist must do whatever is most likely to create the most love. Okay? So then you apply that to the stealing. So is stealing most practical? Well, stealing most practical to result in love. Well, stealing is loving because that will provide food, which will stop her children from starving, which is a loving thing to do. But you've got to ask, is it the most practical, is the most likely thing to work? And here you could discuss and show the examiner, a bit of intelligent thought process. So, you could suggest, well, actually, is stealing the most practical? And perhaps not. Perhaps the woman could have gone to a shelter to get some food. There's also the possibility that she could get arrested, and then the children are going to be in more trouble and going to starve for longer because they've not got a mother there to provide for them at all. However, to conclude that to conclude the paragraph, however, the stealing is going to result in love, most likely, because she will get some food, especially if she only steals a few little bits and is unlikely to get caught. And so it is justifiable because it is likely to produce love, as long as she doesn't get caught. So then moving on to the application of relativism. And so again, first kind of line or two, explain what relativism is. So Fletcher says that the situationist must do what would result in most love relative to, in other words, specifically to that situation. And so is stealing is loving relative to the situation? Well, yes, because again, stealing, the children are starving, so relative to that situation, they're going to need some food, so it is loving if she steals. Also important to take into account is that there's only one shopkeeper, they have no employees, so you weigh that up against the fact that she's got 3 children, so it's creating more love, because even though it's exploiting that one shopkeeper, there are more children who are suffering, and so therefore more people, it's more loving for more people if she steals. And so to conclude, the stealing is moral in this situation. So then we'll move on to the application of positivism. Again, explain positivism, and Fletcher says that the situationist has got to act on the faith claim, the freely chosen belief that God is loving and therefore we too should be loving. And so we've got to ask, does stealing in this situation follow or act on that faith claim, that belief? Well, yes, because the mother is stealing purely out of the love for her children because she doesn't want them to suffer. And is that based on the faith claim that God is love? Well, yes, it is, because Jesus did similar things. For example, when he allowed his followers to pick grain on the Sabbath day, which was obviously against the Jewish law of the time, and so he put the law aside for love, and similarly healed on the Sabbath day, and so on. And so he acted out in that way as well. So based on the belief that Jesus did that, and based on the belief that God is loving, the mother should act out of love as well. And so to conclude, the stealing is moral again. So following on from that, you then talk about agape love and bring in here aspects of the 6 fundamental principles. So you would link it, have a nice flow from the previous paragraph, link it to positivism. So Fletcher says we've got to act out of love because God is loving, and so then talk about how in the 6 fundamental principles he explains what he means by love, and in particular what he's talking about is agape love, which is unconditional and non-reciprocal love. So take each one of those characteristics of agape love in turn and apply it to her stealing, the mother stealing. So is the love the mother is showing unconditional? Yes, because what unconditional means is no matter what, no matter who it's for, no matter what, you love. And so is it no matter what? Well, yes it is, because she could be arrested. It's putting herself at risk, but she's doing it out of the love for her children, so it is no matter what. Secondly, is the love the mother is showing non-reciprocal? Yes, it is, because non-reciprocal means you do something without expecting anything in return, and the mother is not stealing to get anything from her children in return. She's just doing it purely out of love. So again, conclude, which actually I've not included on this slide, but then you would conclude and say the stealing is moral because it's done out of agape love. Okay, and then finally we come on to the application of personalism. So again, explain personalism. And Fletcher says that the situationist must put loving people above following the law blindly. So in other words, you've got to do what is loving for people as opposed to just following the law for the sake of following the law. And so you've got to ask, is stealing putting the love of her children above the law? Well, obviously yes it is, because stealing is illegal. However, she is stealing because she's putting the needs of her children above the law. She knows that if she doesn't steal, the children are going to starve, they could possibly die. So in their best interest, she is putting the law to one side, breaking the law for love. So to conclude, she is breaking the law for love, and so therefore it is moral because she's putting the love of her children above the law, which Fletcher says is justifiable. So then finally you would just conclude the essay with a conclusion as to whether or not the stealing is ethical, and so you could say that relative to the situation that you've discussed, it is ethical to steal as it is the most loving thing to do, which ultimately for Fletcher is what determines whether or not an action is good or bad. The mother should be allowed to put the law aside for love, and then just as a kind of an extra bit really, just to show the examiner you really understand what's going on here. You could discuss how if the situation was slightly different, then perhaps the stealing wouldn't be moral. So, for example, if the shop was going to go bankrupt, if the mother stole, and let's say that the shopkeeper had a big family, and that they would, if the shop went bankrupt, they're then going to suffer. Then obviously in that situation, it would not be the most loving thing to do, the stealing, and so therefore it would not be ethically justifiable. Okay, I hope that was useful.